would like to introduce you guys to our panelists for our mental health panel. Moderator Rheya Spigner, Breanne Ward, Kayla Bell-Consolver, and Mr. Tim Johnson. Thank you.
All right, good morning or afternoon, everybody. My name is Rheya Spigner, formerly with Channel 8. Some of you guys might know me from there. I have recently started my business, so I'm CEO and founder of Radiant Consulting and Communications. Thank you. Very honored to be here today with these wonderful panelists. So I'm going to start with them before we get going. I want you guys to introduce yourself, say your name, your pronoun, and your organization, please.
Awesome. I am Breanne Ward. I go by she, her, and hers. I am the founder and operator of Forward Consulting LLC, where we offer mental health. Hey. Y'all know me. Where we offer mental health counseling, as well as we do a lot of consulting within our small local human service agencies around equity and inclusion.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Kayla Bell-Consolver. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the director of Drake University's Counseling Center, and that's who I am here representing. However, I also recently just started my LLC. It's called Question Kayla LLC, which is focused on mental health consulting, trainings, and presentations.
Yes.
I'm Tim Johnson. I'm the Behavioral Health Services Coordinator for Des Moines Public Schools. I don't have my own business. However, the LLC might be coming soon. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. These three leaders in our community are moving the topic of mental health forward and striving to develop equity in these needed spaces. So we're going to start with a question for all of them just to warm you guys up. Why did you guys enter this space? Why did you enter the mental health field?
I was like, I don't mind going first. I entered it for a variety of reasons that actually developed over time as I learned a little bit more about mental health. So originally, when I was a sophomore in high school, I learned that there was a first-year student that died by suicide. And I remember just being so distraught with the fact that someone could be walking next to me struggling so significantly, and I wasn't aware. So from then I developed a lot of focus on suicide prevention. However, once I became into the mental health profession, I recognized a lot of the learning that I was receiving and going through the programs didn't include me or people that looked like me or had my experiences or intersectional identities. So I devoted a lot more interest to what does this look like to counsel and help Black people, people of color, people that are queer, trans, all of that. And that's kind of driven my passion and how I've seen it show up in so many different aspects of my life, because I do believe that a lot of it can be preventative, but we often are very reactive. So that's what drew me to this position.
For me, I grew up in poverty myself, single mom, and I saw all of her struggles. And then once I became a little older, I was able to reflect on all those struggles. I was able to work with Corey over at Orchard Place for about 4 years. And then at the psychiatric residential facility, I saw a lot of need for people that look like me, and then also for those that are in like the DHS or foster care system. Those needs there's like a wide gap as far as that care and what that service looks like. Originally, I wanted to be a teacher. I had to take a test. I did not want to take the teacher licensure exam. So then I hopped over to social work. I always knew that I wanted to give back and help people, and here we are today.
And similarly to my colleagues, I wanted to be a teacher as well. I was guided a lot by my matriarchs. My grandmother was a LPN. I had a favorite teacher in 4th grade, Miss Nancy Brown, if you're watching, hey. And I had this fuel to connect people. I loved that when I was little. I went to school to be a fashion designer as well, but I just felt like I wasn't being fulfilled. And so I went to a human development class, and that sold me. HDFS 102 at Iowa State, Craig Allen was teaching, and I didn't want him to stop. And so once I realized that the brain can make someone do beautiful things, but also do heinous things, I wanted to know the disconnect between that. And then I was able to use some of that teaching by being a trainer as a violent crime specialist. And so it was really important for me to take that information because a lot of crime was happening to people who looked like me. And so I wanted to make sure that people knew the names of what they were experiencing, and that's what got me into mental health counseling. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna start back with you. This is for you specifically. What is a problem you're seeing more of or have seen in Black and Brown communities post-2020 when this community was feeling strained from both the pandemic and social injustice?
Absolutely. I think what I have been able to see is the normalization of holistic pain. And what was going on prior to 2020 was a lot of distraction and a lot of deflection. So there were a lot of things that you can get yourself into to not have to focus on your pain. But when things shut down, closed off, and just ended, that's when people really had to sit with themselves and deal with themselves. And so I really saw a depletion of social support, emotional regulation. People could not regulate well. And one of the things that I have learned in this field is that your emotions run faster through your body than your thoughts, likely 80,000 times faster than a thought. And so if you're navigating fear and anger, that's always going to go faster through your body than your thoughts. And so when I was able to see that people were struggling with that, that became a mindset that I wanted to focus in on more, especially after the pandemic, because you're gonna know you gotta learn how to regulate if you want to go back to work, go back to school, and get involved in the community. So that's what I was seeing.
Okay, thank you. Kayla and Tim, this is specifically for y'all. What were you or are you seeing developmentally in educational spaces from this time period?
Yeah, so I want to build on that as well. Things I've seen, especially with the students of color that I work with. I think because they live in that space and it's happening, you really can't escape. So we think about some of us, we're able to go home and maybe it's a safer space than others, but when you're consistently living in the space where you're actively traumatized, racially traumatized, I see internally then you can't even escape. So like what Breanne mentioned, like you don't have the opportunities to regulate, and you have to find those before you prepare for the next thing. So before you go into the school and you have more microaggressions or even from professors, teachers, but your peers, or people that are just uncertain of how to respond, and then you feel really isolated. So developmentally, especially since the pandemic, I've seen a lot of isolation internally, such as like, I don't belong here. I don't know if I will be able to belong here, so I have to escape. And sometimes escape looks like I have to leave the space. I have to go find another safe space. But I've also seen an increase in suicidal ideation because I don't know if I'll ever be able to exist in spaces such as this. And when we think about the pandemic, I think the pandemic impacted us so uniquely because as you're fighting to survive, right, with masks and vaccines, you're also fighting to survive, a traffic stop, or you're fighting to survive what might be happening in the next space. And that was just so compounded because we didn't have the emotional literacy yet. So developmentally, you weren't able to talk about or even name like what you were experiencing. So I've seen when individuals even come to counseling, we're starting at that foundation. Can we even recognize what's happening in the body? Because generationally, ancestrally, we haven't had permission to do so. So then we're trying to relearn, unlearn that, but then you haven't had the capacity to do that with other people because you're quarantined and you're isolated. So it's just been such a complex compound of mental health concerns.
Yep, I would just piggyback. The complexity around it is huge. And I'll talk about the staff because you kind of talked about kids. So I work for Des Moines Public Schools. So in our setting, there's already not a lot of people that look like me that work for our school district. And then on top of right when school started, there was never like a buffer. So teachers were expected to come back and be ready to teach right away. There was a lot of social skills that were lost. There was a lot of skill deficit that was lost. And then once we came back to school, because of those things that were happening, we forgot how to interact with each other. So on top of the isolation, as now being a kid, healthy adults can't help kids become healthy if they're not healthy themselves. So currently, we're in situations where staff are now feeling a lot more suicidal. Staff are taking FMLA on a higher rate than we've ever seen. Across the nation, the teacher shortage is impacting students of all kinds, especially the ones that look like us, because we already don't feel like we belong or we're connected to the school that we go to. There's a substitute shortage, so now that student feels, why do I have to go to school because my primary teacher isn't even in the building? So there's just a bunch of disconnect, and in times of now when we need to heal or have those conversations, there's mistrust. So kind of like we were talking about, like ancestrally, we already kind of don't trust certain agencies or people to tell us how we should feel or help us come up with the thoughts about how we feel because of that mistrust. So my thought is, if you're not doing anything related to mental health, having those conversations at home so that it becomes more normalized. People are okay to actually express how they feel, but also giving time for that expression to happen. If you're unwilling to listen or you're uncomfortable with listening to that, giving a name, giving somebody else so that that conversation can still be had, because people really don't know how to express themselves or articulate in a way that if they do go see a therapist, they can't tell that therapist how they feel because of the language has never been given to them.
That's really good. Okay, so you guys both kind of brought up this point of generational traumas that I kind of want to get into a little bit more. Tim, you gave the example of mistrust in the community, but there are, of course, so many other generational traumas that we are living with, and then we go into these spaces where we're dealing with so many other aspects, as you mentioned, Kayla. So I want to know, is there a significant example or ideology around generational traumas that you can give us, and how in the Black and brown community do we start to counter that, aside from just getting help, like the process of acknowledging it?
I'll go. So I'm a big relationship guy. I love talking with people. I love having conversations. The more that we're willing to have a conversation and willing to actually tell somebody that I feel this way is the start. A lot of times we'll get into settings where I'm trying to project or be in competition with other folks around me so that I can't really unmask myself. I can't authentically be myself, so that I have to now hide who I am, shed parts of me when I'm having that conversation because I don't want to feel less than. Not being okay is not okay. So the more, like I said, the more that we're able to have that conversation, the more that we're able to build relationships with folks and be our authentic, true self, is my way of, I feel like, attacking some of those things.
Absolutely. So when I think of generational trauma, something that comes out, we want to think about like epigenetics. And so for those that don't know what like epigenetics is
Break it down.
Right. Scientifically proven. So we're not just talking. But there's a study where they did it with rats, and they put them in a cage and kind of shocked them and gave them this experience. And then over time, they kept doing that to the next generation. And then eventually those that had never even experienced the shock, they still had that, they felt the shock. So when we think about that as it relates to emotions, sometimes we call them legacy burdens. So these are things that you might be carrying emotionally that happened long before you. So a lot in therapy, we do a lot of like ancestral things, so we can never forget the impact of slavery, bondage, and all of that. But if we don't look at it that way, let's look at potentially if you had a grandparent that struggled, let's say with trauma, there was a fear that happened, it kept happening over and over and over again. They never got the chance to process that. So what ends up happening, they adapt to process that. So over time, they learn different ways to protect, so that way they don't experience that fear. So then they have their children to make sure they have those same aspects that happen. And then what happens over time is it just keeps getting passed down. So that way it's the impact of you're feeling that you never even experienced that. So a tangible example would be sometimes even the N-word. I've worked with students, especially when I worked at Orchard Place, similar to Tim. There are students that have never even heard that word, felt that word, but just even acknowledging it, they feel triggered. Like there's anxiety within their bodies, and they can't name that because they're like, no one's ever said that to me. However, generationally, that was a burden that was passed down, the pain connected to that. And since we never processed that, it kind of just developed a bigger and bigger container. So what happens is that container just becomes so strong, and then we navigate and we keep getting activated there. Eventually it unfolds. So what I work with a lot, and I'll give an example because I work with a lot of Black women, and this legacy burden that shows up the most is I don't have time to take care of myself. I can't take care of myself. I have to focus on so many people. And we recognize that as a generational burden. I mean, that goes all the way back because you didn't have the capacity or the ability to do that. So when we think about unlearning that, is working with the people to say, can you give yourself permission that others never had the opportunity to? I have permission to rest now. I have the opportunity to do this. I can take care of others and take care of myself because we have to change the script. So when you think about legacy burdens, generational trauma, it's like, how do you rewrite the story that other people didn't get the opportunity to?
Now, can I put a little something on that? Okay. So as I'm listening to Tim and Kayla speak, the thing that comes to me is, what does that look like on the inside, right? And so when I think about how trauma impacts us internally, there are three things that are happening within our brain, or is impacting three parts of the brain, which I feel, because I work with it a lot. It's your prefrontal cortex, your forehead. Then you got your hippocampus next to your kitchen, okay? And then you have your amygdalas, and I call them the M&Ms behind your ears, right? These three things work in conjunction when you're scared. These things work in conjunction when you don't have words to express. These three things work in conjunction even normally. So for instance, I live by Easter Lake. So Hartford, you're driving down Hartford, you're gonna see a deer or five running across the street, right? These three things work together to keep me safe. But what happens when I think I'm unsafe all the time? That means that I'm creating so much cortisol in my body that is kind of toxic, right? So I'm jumping when the door opens, or I get very, very upset at minimal stressors. And so when you have an abundance of stress hormones running through your body, there's another connection. I want to go back to our panel before. You're looking for sugar and you're looking for salt to calm you down because it's comfort. And because you're exerting so much of that stress, you need to get that back, right? So naturally, you're thinking like, well, you shouldn't be eating a bag of chips, right? But you don't know that because you're trying to comfort yourself. You don't know that because there's nothing that's in your environment that's causing you to reduce that stress level at that time because your cortisol is speaking for you. So when you see a child, when you see a teacher, when you see an adult who's navigating oddly, don't think about like what's wrong with them. Think about how much stress they're under. And you might want to incorporate a conversation around their stress level. And I think that's really important because the majority of the clients that I serve at Forward Consulting are Medicaid recipients. So that's usually 75 to 80% of our clientele. So when I'm thinking about them, I'm thinking about them holistically because again, we've been taught in my culture to normalize pain. Minimize pain, deny pain, right? And so I'm thinking about, did you eat before you got here? There's granola bars up front. When people come through, do you need something to drink? We have water, tea, coffee, you pick. That's called power and control because trauma takes your voice. Trauma is a thing also, you all, that Dr. Andrew Jacobs told me at Drake University when I was sitting in his classroom getting my master's. Trauma is anything that happens to you or around you that you didn't ask for and you're left by yourself to try to cope with it. And a lot of us know what that feels like. You're smoking too much, you drinking too much, you working too much, you watching other people's kids too much, you walking other people's dogs too much, you sleeping too much, you binge watching too much. There's a lot, you're just doing too much, right? And so we need to be thinking, if we are always saying, I don't have time, or there's too much going on, think about how much cortisol is in your body and how are you gonna get it out?
Come on, y'all. Right? Okay. So this was kind of, you guys started to answer this next question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Where do you feel like you all have made the biggest stride in your respective spaces? And what is an area you're seeing in Black and Brown communities collectively that needs attention?
I'll speak from the public education side.
Okay, you go ahead.
So for me my mission is to connect mental health curriculum to public education. So right now in public education, it's always curriculum and instruction. So within that, you got math, science, English, writing, I should know this, whatever those core concepts are.
Yes.
So those are always going to be the primary focus on top of all of the board goals that we have to reach in order to stay funded by our governor. So with that, we oftentimes miss what stress looks like, what anxiety looks like, what depression looks like, all of those big factors of indicators for our teachers who are frontline responders to then create a response to better support those students or manage their classrooms. So with that, connecting the fact that through youth mental health first aid, what does a student look like when they're anxious? Are they fidgeting? Are they doing something with their hands? Are they pacing in your classrooms? Are they sweating? What does depression or sadness look like in your classrooms? Are they putting their heads down? Are they disengaged? Are they avoiding things? So some of those they seem simple to probably the mental health people in the room, you know what I'm saying, because we're used to doing that and responding in that way. But as far as educators, it's a completely different language. Completely different language. The next mission I have is we just purchased some software. So I've been around to all of our schools to get the software in their computers so that now we can kind of track what student mental health looks like through web search, web browsers, through conversations. And then next is the curriculum piece. How am I providing that training so that staff can now have a better response to some of these things that they're seeing in their classrooms? Because oftentimes people think that you need to be an expert, but you don't have to have any kind of expertise to be kind, to be loving, to give your ear so that you can listen to those kids who are in need.
Well, I think one of the biggest strides that I feel I've made is being able to notice even the mental health strain and stress of Black mental health clinicians. I think what maybe mainstream community doesn't know, there's no one that looks like me who can guide me in this work. And so we are leaning on one another as we're trying to figure this out together. And so I had this weird idea after talking to a couple of my colleagues, Will Walker and Brian Ellis of Thriving Family Counseling, and they said, you know, we just should get together once a month and kick it and play games and eat and, you know, just catch a vibe. And what they will, God bless him, he's so strategic in his thinking. So he was trying to like tell everyone, like he was doing one by one, like, come on, don't you want, this is gonna be great. So the issue was that there was so much combativeness that no one wanted to meet. I said, that can't be true. I said, let me tell him I'm gonna pay for lunch and see what happens. So my friend Jakari and I of Courageous Minds Counseling, and if you don't notice, I'm shouting people out, because community means everything. And here's the thing, there's so much of mental health needs that are going around, ain't nobody trying to snatch from nobody, okay? Just want to throw that out there. But Jakari Owens and I got together and I said, all right, so let's see what happens. So September of last year, we got together and we had our first Black Therapist Meetup DSM. And it was so much fun at Forward Consulting. We had the big screen going. We had the 90 jams growing. And we were just actually talking to one another and saying, what are you seeing in your practice and what do you need to go back to your practice? And it caught wind, and we try to do it at least once a month. And so what we're finding is that we're creating community, and people in our community who need mental health services are getting them faster and more efficiently because we have those relationships. And then another thing that we're doing is we're looking at community agencies to get into fiscal partnership with. Making okay, how you doing, girl? Hey, Jamie. She was able to sponsor one of our Black groups. What we were seeing at Forward Consulting is this abundance of a wait list, and there was no way to get people on our calendars. And so we were working really hard and strategically, what could we do? And we said, well, why don't we try a relational communal group? And so we created the Healing Space, and it was a group for Black women to come in and learn somatically. What has your body gone through? What can you thank it for? And then what kind of environment can you put it in so that it could thrive versus survive? And we've been able to get 2 cohorts in, and we're looking for more fiscal agents to come alongside us, because here's the deal. Okay, I'm just going.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sorry.
All right, you all right? Okay. Y'all, when y'all get me up here, I be talking.
This is what this is for. Go ahead.
But here's the deal. So someone talked about reimbursement rates and insurance and things of that nature. Due to a lot of us who take Medicaid in our private practice, we're not reimbursed for all that we give to a client individually, or a person that we serve individually. And so also sometimes when you're doing group work, you have to find an evidence-based curriculum that is approved or makes sense to the insurer or the insurance company to reimburse you. Here's the deal. Evidence-based practices didn't involve me, didn't involve us. You see what I'm saying? So how you gonna tell me what's gonna work for my community? So I'd rather have a fiscal agent who will come alongside me and say, hey, how can we serve you to serve people so that both of our goals are being met. And so I just really want to thank Iowa's Healthy Initiative. And if there's any other initiatives up in here who want to see me, holla at me. I'm over here. Because our next group is we want to do a restorative justice group for women re-entering into the community, but we also want to do a connectivity group for youth so they won't feel like they're isolated and have to choose the streets for community.
Love that. Yeah.
Oh, you want to get my class?
Yes, very good.
What I do want to say before I go in is definitely to shout out Breanne, because I have gone to those Black therapies meetups, and they have literally transformed my life to have a space. Because I was one of those that came into a program, and I had never had a supervisor, had never had a group or a class of people that even looked like me to have some of those conversations. So thank you, truthfully. I'll add, so something that I've been really passionate about is changing like the face and culture of like what a therapist looks like or what it acts like. So everybody often, when you think of a therapist, there's an identity that comes to the mind, and they often wear a cardigan. And that is not my style. That is not my style at all. And so I've really focused on how do we actually change the culture of mental health? How do we change the stigma of mental health so that way people feel as though I can go talk to somebody or I want to talk to somebody. So I've done a lot of that, especially in my role at Drake. I am involved. I'm all over. I like to do a lot of things to help the students say, no, this is what mental health looks like. It's okay to talk about this. These are what counselors look like. These are the concepts and things we see you. And I do a lot of that with the equity and diversity lens, so that way we can really target that. But I do a lot of that also on like social media. So I have a lot of fun like content creating. My goal is to like eliminate the stigma and shame connected to seeking help. So I like to do a lot of fun videos, things such as that, so that way you can see, yeah, oh, I'm going through that, absolutely, and it's normal, it's natural, doing a lot of engagement, because I want to plant as many seeds all across the world as possible as it relates to mental health. And so that's a little bit of even what I do in my work is a lot of shame attacking, because it looks like shame is the one thing that stops people from getting to the door. They say most people consider going to therapy at least 3 to 4 times before they even pick up the phone. So by the time someone's even coming to an appointment, they've already wrestled with themselves saying, I don't really need this, do I? What's wrong with me? And that is my hope, to try to shift that so that way people say, no, it's okay to see a counselor. It's fun. I can see my counselor. My counselor wears Jordans. You know, that's what I do. And so things such as that way no one is ever feeling as though they cannot receive the help that they need.
And sis, don't forget, she done been viral twice out here in these streets.
Okay.
I do have a video that got 500,000.
Okay. Come on, 500K. I wanted to follow up with you on, because you kind of just like brushed over it, that you're doing things in the equity and inclusion lens, but what are you doing, and what does that look like, and what are the necessary things so that people understand what is needed in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think of like equity as it relates to like mental health, is I see everything through an anti-racist lens. So I think it's important when I name that, that's what I'm talking about. And so what we're thinking about mental health systemically, there's a lot of concerns. So you think there's a lack of counselors, like maybe 5%, especially our Black clinicians. It's even worse for like psychologists. That is not due because we're not out here. That's due to the systems in place. And so what I see often is that individuals, especially people of color, but across the board, but I see this so often with people of color, is that they feel like I can't find someone who looks like me. And then if I do find someone who doesn't look like me, I'm having microaggressions that are happening as soon as I get in the door. So when I think of equity as it relates to mental health, there's training for clinicians. I've done a lot of work like that. I've done that work in my own the counseling center, and then in my past jobs of like, how are we actually assessing people? Are we even asking about racial trauma in the intake? Are we just assuming it doesn't happen? Where there are certain things happening around the community, especially like during the pandemic, are we even asking our clients how that is impacting them? And I know for us it might seem like obviously yes, but that was not practiced across the board. And what was often starting to happen is that we were referring them to clinicians of color. You hear Breanne is saying like that wait list, absolutely, because then we are experiencing the burden and the brunt of all of that, not having the resources to pour out to it. So a lot of when I think of systemic mental health is how are we actually seeing the concerns related to diversity, equity, inclusion through a mental health lens. If someone's experiencing, how does that connect to isolation, belonging? How does that connect to suicidal ideation? Because the increase in suicide really related to like Black youth, respective to what is happening with white youth, is concerning. It is not being talked about. Our kids, and that is something our culture has often prided ourselves on, is that we don't do that. Like we don't commit suicide. That's not us, but it is us. And so systemically, equity is even talking about it through that lens. Like this is impacting our community. What does that look like? Do we have the language? Can we train more people? Because there's not enough of us. There will never be enough of us. But how do we actually train other people so that way that we can get the help that we need? And so that's what I look at as like that. And then last but not least, and I'll shut it down, is like No, it's like the barriers and even getting to the door. So who are the people that are actually going to reach out to these communities? I think with our profession, we often say they will come to us. But when there's not a lot of us, we can create a significant power imbalance. So what are we doing to actually go to the communities, to speak to them and say, we want to help you, we care about you, we're connected. That is through our social media. That is through all different forms of marketing. That is through the targets and the conversations that we're having with people. So that's a little bit of that work, but also working with people who are doing the work. So individuals, so what that looks like at Drake is I'm working with the provost. We're having those conversations, working with other individuals in leadership roles. How are we doing this work? And then I have to stay involved. Us as mental health clinicians, we can't just turn a blind eye and say, oh, let me just focus on mental health, and then they do that. We can't operate in silos.
Thank you. Yes. Each one of you has talked about microaggressions. Does everybody know what that is? Microaggressions? Okay. I didn't, well, I said that to say because I didn't know really what I was experiencing or like how, like the language until I experienced it. And then I started going to therapy and started learning and started going to school and understanding like, oh, I'm feeling these little nuances or like tics of microaggressions. So I was gonna say like, what does that look like? What can that look like to identify it and to understand like, yeah, that happened to me and I am feeling something in the workspace and any space.
Well, I've had so many microaggressive moments, but I didn't have a definition for it until 2013. And I was well married. I had kids and, all of those things. And so once I learned it, I was more aware of how often it was happening to me. And I know that we are in the state of Iowa, and there is a colloquialism that is used here. We are Iowa nice. But I like to call it nice nasty. Because sometimes people will say things to you, and it kind of leaves you like,
right. That face.
Should I be offended right now? Because that part, it feels like a backhanded compliment, right? And so I've experienced this in my field as well. It's the idea of, I'll never forget a time where a young lady invited her parents to a counseling session, and before we could even get started, mom was rambling off stuff that she found on Google. Do you know what ACT is? Tell me what DBT is. This degree on the wall, did you pay for that? Or it was all of these things. And so I'm like giving it to her, like, cause you swinging, I'm going. But when I got done, I was like, I don't even know if the client that I was serving, the person I was serving at the time got any help, because we're worrying if I am qualified or I have an ebbing of mainstream culture inside of me. And so once that began to happen, I just think that now I have to operate knowing what my boundaries are, knowing what my no will be, but also not demonizing the person who is the perpetrator of a microaggression, but also asking some more reflective questions, because I think it's an opportunity to learn. And that also gives me, if you're a service provider and we're having this conversation, that's also going to make me leery about sending people your way. And so we got to be sure that if you're saying that you are for the community, if you're displaying our pictures and our services and our agency names, please make sure that you are in line with the mission and vision that you say that you're in line with. And if you get challenged on it, don't get mad. Have a response, because we come in to ask you some questions, because we don't have time to keep treating people like numbers, especially our people. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Tim, did you have anything to add?
I'll just say on the public education side, so if you're familiar with Des Moines Public Schools, I'm not trying to bash Des Moines Public Schools by any means, because I work there.
He wants his job, y'all.
However, all of our executive directors, all of our directors, superintendent, powers that be are all white. So in having those conversations, creating those spaces so that we can have these conversations. So some of our data will show that majority of our kids who are black are getting sent to special ed, so getting an individualized education plan, versus our white students who would get a 504 plan, which is more of a It still is an individualized plan. However, you're not going to get an associate. You don't have a caseworker. You don't have all of those other things that come with, and then the label on top of that. So just giving staff, giving our directors that training of what behaviors look like. So if you have a rambunctious child who is black, he is not being abrasive. He is not being aggressive. He's just high energy, just like this other student that is right here. So having those conversations. So, and just like I said, I'm a relationship guy. I've had to do some reflection because sometimes I do get heated and I do get petty. So then when I do feel like I'm being challenged or intimidated, but standing firm on having that conversation to redirect or reflect and then hopefully reframe those thoughts so that staff now can make a better insight to that behavior that those students are showing.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, so last question before we open it up. 4 questions. What does equity look like for mental health to you? What does it look like? That's a very broad question. It's a loaded question. Yeah, because we're not there yet. But what does it look like? What can it look like?
You know, what I think equity looks like in mental health is that however you want to express yourself, it's not going to cause a DHS report. It's not going to cause a call to the police. It's not going to cause me to discharge you early because I'm frightful or fearful or this person's out of control. So it's the idea that mental health will not be punitive for communities of color. Now, I wanted to go back to something that you had said, Kayla, as well, because it kind of answers the question about suicidal ideations and what it could look like. Now, society has trained us that, people are writing letters and, diaries and, they're doing self-harm things. But there's also grandiose behavior that also coincides with suicidal ideations. Driving real fast, music up real loud, smoking a lot of weed at once, drinking a lot, having sex with as many people as I can in one night, just having random erratic behavior. That also could be aligned with suicidal ideations as well. And so when I think about equity in mental health, that stuff shouldn't be deemed as, oh, there is no hope for them. It's the root cause for what is really going on inside of them. I'll give you an example. I have a client who has a lot of isms that they face: racism, sexism, classism, and they're a young person, early 20s. And because of the cultural context of not displaying your feelings, talking about your feelings, had no words for none of the things that she was feeling. But alcohol can make her say a lot of things and do a lot of things. And so what it looks like is that she's uncontrollable and she needs to be in an inpatient institution. She needs to be talked to like she's 5 years old because that's where her emotional intelligence stopped. So I was talking to her as if I was like her mother. I'm really sorry that you're sad right now, and I'm really sorry that you want your mommy right now. Changed the whole game, de-escalated her like this, and we were able to get to emotional regulation and talking about AA and anger management. But if I would have demonized her behavior, we would have gotten nowhere. And so I just think if we can just see a human for a human, that is when we will get somewhere.
Absolutely. And I want to build. And I want to build on that because everything you're saying is so valid. And so when we think like even seeing them as a human, even saying like recognizing that there might be humans with certain experiences that differ from others. And we have such an awareness of that up front that we're able to have like a gauge of like, okay, let me ask a little bit more about this. Let me explore this a little bit more. So like what Breanne's mentioned, let's say you have someone who is maybe engaging in a lot of like risky sexual behaviors, things such as that. They're a person of color, but they're also somebody that is queer. Right, then we can ask a little more questions, right? I might ask, tell me a little bit more about your coming out experience, right? Because if I don't have health equity, I'm not even gonna think about it. I'm not even gonna acknowledge it. I'm gonna be like, oh, they're just going through this. Or I may be aware health equity is like, wow, it was probably really hard for you to even come talk to us because you probably haven't had a lot of experiences where you felt safe, because I'm aware of what your past experiences were. And so I think what happens when you think about mental health is we just take everything as a blank state sometimes, like they're just coming in. It's like, okay, let me just go from there. I'm getting all this information that we don't even take into account truthfully, all the other experiences that impact them even in that room. So health equity is thinking about stages. It's like systemic, like I mentioned. It's the structures in place. This is federal government. This is also state government resources. But then taking it a step further is also, what does the room and the space look like when they even come in to see you? I love Breanne's place because you walk in there, it's like Mary J. Blige, like, you know, somebody selling jewelry. So I'm like, it's for the culture. But if I were to go into that space, I feel so safe. I feel like this is a space for me. And I try to educate people so often. It's like you can go into spaces and you see so many paintings on the wall and none of them look like the people you're serving. You might have so many counselors there. You say, I'm going to work on this space. I'm going to do this. But you don't have any questions on your intake to even assess their unique experiences. So we're missing things. So you think of health equity is like we're no longer missing things because we're constantly gathering information to understand how that might be impacting them. Same way we do with all these other aspects of health. We need to do the same with mental health, which is what we're missing.
I ain't got nothing, but I just didn't want to overtalk the point. They did a great job.
Come on, Tim. All right. Thank you, guys. I want to open it up. Yeah. Let's give them a round of applause. I want to open it up for questions out here, if you have any. Got one over here, Larry.
Before the question, though, could I plug some? Yeah. So if you guys know of any school-based therapists, any agencies who have capacity to continue to do partnerships, please reach out to me. I can give you guys my email address and all of that. As you know, with the teacher shortage, we also have a therapist shortage. So right now I have a school-based therapist in about 60% of our schools. So we still have students who are going without. Orchard Place is one of our biggest providers to provide that school-based therapy. So we also open the partnership up to community providers as well. So if you have any of those or just are open to having a conversation around what that looks like, please let me know.
Tim?
Hi again. First of all, fangirl for everybody on stage. Love you. Actually, that's what I was going to ask about. Is I originally wanted, when I was in grad school, wanted to be in school-based therapy, and there were like 3 or 4 organizations I think that contracted with DMPS for it. I waited a year to try to find an internship spot because each one only had like 1 or 2 slots open, and they're always full. So I ended up not doing school-based therapy. Since then, I've had clients who work in the school system tell me about the insane wait lists for kids at school who are needing to seek access to services. And I'm all about accessibility. I don't, like my question, I don't know if you know this or if you're even in charge of making those decisions, but like, how do you do that? Like, is it beneficial to keep contracting out to agencies, or does DMPS directly hire school-based therapists? Like, no? Okay, and I'd love to hear more about it. I have some ideas on why you're shaking your head, but I want to hear more about it.
Well, I'd love to build on that too, because that's something we've seen similarly at Drake. We have 4.5 counselors for 4,500 students. So when I think of like, how do we enhance services, it's recognizing, you think of health equity for mental health is very different than mental health therapy equity. And so recognizing that mental health is everyone's responsibility. So it's how do we empower every person at every seat of the table to be able to respond in an appropriate way when related to mental health. So if someone is coming to say, hey, I need to talk about something, I'm crying, we're not saying, oh, let me just get you to a counselor. We actually have the skills and the tools, ability to work with someone and talk through that, because that's how we eliminate barriers to like mental health. And then we recognize, okay, you need a little bit more support. Then we can find those referrals or different things. So that might be, do we even have a calm down space within the space so we can say, hey, why don't we go take a break, or let's go a walk for here? Do we have the flexibility within schedules to say, okay, I have a little bit more time, let's do this exercise? That might be where our profession, we come in and we can help train and educate. But that, I think, is how you make a systemic change related to mental health. For sure. So I call it like the therapeutic web. So staff response is always going to be keen to anything you do. As staff, you know, we're 50% of that conversation. So if I'm coming in stressed, if I'm coming in not combative to whatever you're showing me, we're not going to get anywhere in this conversation. However, if I come in and I'm taking care of myself, I'm aware of my triggers myself, I'm aware of what I'm capable of doing, my response is completely different from that kid who is struggling.
So right now in Des Moines, as I said, we have that teacher shortage, so everybody is stressed out. So a lot of the times when teachers are intervening, they don't feel comfortable in the space because they're not comfortable with themselves. The stress level is so high across the board from the top to the bottom. Right now we're doing the interim, the superintendent search. So even our superintendent is stressed out right now. So our response, as Kayla was saying, is vital. Creating that therapeutic web. Is there a trusted adult in that building that student can go and have a conversation with? Are there a couple trusted adults in that building? Does that student even feel like they're connected, and who is the person that's going to have that conversation with that student or family to give them the support that they need? Oftentimes we do want to make the referral to therapy, but sometimes people can just have that 5-minute conversation and their day is completely changed.
Amazing, thank you. Any other questions?
Yep, we have a question over here.
Okay.
So my question kind of builds off that. Tim, I am a former teacher. I resigned last year after 12 years. So I really, and it was largely because of my mental health. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that we have these people in this field who are so stressed, and then you have very stressed students as well. And that, of course, extends to people who are in the mental health field, too. Counselors, whether they're school-based or not, I have friends who are there, and I'm sure you know as well, carrying that emotional load that others put on you is, a prime stress that can occur. So I guess what do any of you do to help with that? And what advice do you have for others or services that you're aware of that they can do? And please don't say go take a walk and self-care.
I'll go first because I know what I do for myself. You have to know yourself. So I'm a big self-reflector. Anything I do, either with my wife or responding to my children or just out in the community, I'm always reflecting on my experience, my space that I'm in, and am I comfortable? Do I feel like I'm connected, or do I belong? So once you're able to kind of cut out some of that noise, and then get in tune with yourself as far as the things that are going to benefit you, not benefit anybody, but benefit you. Create your list of non-negotiables as far as what I need to have happen in order for me to feel safe, for me to feel sane in whatever experience that I'm having in. So that could be cutting out friends. That could be cutting out food. We talked about that, the stomach and what the gut health looks like. Gut health is impacting a lot of things as far as our brain functions go. What we're watching on TV, who we're talking to, gossip that we're participating in. I know you said don't talk about self-care, but I'm going to. I'm a big exercise guy. I'm a big exercise guy. Exercise, I wake up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym. That is one thing that I will never stop doing because of my wife always comes home, you got that runner's high. Yes, that runner's high literally lasts me all day until I get done. I have to work out. That's one thing that I know about myself. I have to move weight. I got to go play basketball. I got to do something that is active in order for me to function and be around people and be in events like this.
Absolutely, I'll build on that because I love exercising as well. And lifting weights, moving, that is mindfulness. So all those exercises, like notice your body, what does that feel like? Sometimes that is another way to be in touch with your body. However, I want to mention also there's power in connection and there's power in community. For some reason, we often isolate and we say, I'm dealing with this, I have to deal with it all by myself. And that is a fast track to burnout. That is a fast track to deep internal isolation. So I often surround myself with community, even when I feel like I should go home. There was a time we did the Black Therapist meeting. I was like, I'm so tired, but you know what? I'm gonna give myself 30 minutes just to go into that space. And it was so uplifting because there's shared space, because then you're no longer carrying that burden by yourself. So that's something that helps me often. And the biggest thing for me, honestly, is connecting with my inner child. I love that so much. So what that looks like is go back to the things that you used to love to do when you were a child. It could be the most simple, silly, whatever it is, because back then that's when we had the most permission just to be free. And as we get older, we lose that. So if you find ways, I love to play the clarinet. Used to love to do that. I color, I play 2K, I do all these things. I have a lot
Y'all have to get to her TikTok account for real.
TikTok is fun. I don't know. Yeah, I love it. Anyway, I would say finding those moments of fun and joy. And sometimes we find that in cultivating those past experiences. And that gets me through. That's why I'm able to sit here and just smile and laugh, knowing that life is hard. Right?
Well, I have a different perspective. I think that when you've done something for so long and you've loved it and you've involved yourself and invested yourself, and then yourself says you have to stop, the first thing you have to do is grieve it. There's no way around it. How you doing? I'm doing great, girl. I ain't gotta look at these kids no more. You're gonna miss those babies. You're gonna miss the staff meeting. You're gonna miss the connection you'd have. You're gonna miss certain things in the environment. Grieve. It's okay. Now, there's a part in the grief cycle. There's 5 stages. Many of you know those, but there's 6 and 7. There is hope and acceptance, and then there's reconstruction. Figure out how you're gonna reconstruct your life so that you still feel you have meaning. Because I think what happens a lot of times is when we feel burned out, we feel like we're useless. No one wants us. We don't even want us. And so we have to figure out our new leash at life. And so here's what happened to me. I caught COVID. It felt like sinus infection, and it went down here, and I said, oh, wait a minute. Steroids, please. Saved my life. And so COVID happened, and then I found out that I was low iron anemic. I had iron deficiency like crazy. My ferritin level was like between 18 and 24. Any of you who know what that's all about? That means like how you still up walking. But that caused me to think about something. I give so much to so many other people, and the simple things to live, I don't even do for myself. Sleep. You know, occasionally, you know, just resting, reading a book, drinking water, like all those things I wasn't doing. And so we have to go back to our basics, whatever those basics are. Make sure you go back there and realign yourself there. And I think that will get you to the wellness that you're looking for.
Love that. There was one more question over here.
And I just want to interject for 1 second. If you're not following Question Kayla on Instagram or TikTok, you are doing yourself a disservice. When she walked in this building, I stopped. Because she is so amazing.
I appreciate it.
I share almost every post of hers. She's awesome. So
We love the plug.
I'll have to follow you. Okay, I have a question. I'm a community health worker, and I work with a lot of people that are diagnosed with cancer or various health issues, and I've tried to connect them with some mental therapists in our area, and they said those are situational problems and that they would not see them. How do you address those issues?
Call the board. No.
You can't make a report to the board, though. You said the therapist said that they wouldn't see those clients?
Because it's situational stress? Oh.
So just so I understand, you're saying the patients are saying that I don't want to go to a therapist because those are...
But the clinicians are saying.
The therapist said that those are situational issues and they were not really depression or mental health issues. It's just because of their health issues. And so they...
Well, I would echo reporting them to the board. It's unethical. And I hear you saying, how would we respond to those individuals? Well, that's concerning. So first and foremost, if they came to us and they said that, we just probably spend a lot of time validating that because you've just really just disposed of someone when they're already probably feeling disposable, which is why we say we report that to the board. I mean, that's ethical violation, non-malfeasance, all of that. If someone were coming to me with that, which I have had people that have had those certain those concerns, it's like Breanne said, there's a lot of grief, right? We are not here to just say we're just going to fix it because that is unrealistic. That's unfair to someone. So a lot of it might even just be spending time like processing the impact of just hearing that diagnosis. What does that mean to you? What's that experience like? And we might sit with it because we're not trying to escape that feeling, right? Every other part of someone's life, they are trying to escape the discomfort because they're trying to cope. And we want therapy to at least be a space that we can sit with you and process that grief because you may not feel like you can talk to your family because you're worried they can't handle it and things such as that. So that is a little bit of how we sit with that. And then I might tell them, say, hey, can we just at least acknowledge that? Can we practice any skills in this moment if they want that, right? Because I want to make sure that they get some lead and direction with that because when you experience a terminal diagnosis or one that you perceive as terminal, you feel you don't have any choice what's happening within your life. So in therapy, we're going to give all of that back as much as possible. And then in that moment, we might say, hey, is there any small thing that we want to even focus on? So if someone says, I can't control my diagnosis, all of these things are happening, but then they say, I'm having all these panic attacks and I don't know what to do with that or I'm having nightmares. We might say, do we want to focus on that? Is that something that you would need in this moment? Or we like to focus a little bit more on the diagnosis. Again, giving them choice and autonomy through that. That's how I've approached it in the past. So.
All right.
We have
Love
another
that.
comment
Thank
back
you.
here.
Okay.
I work for NAMI Iowa, and we see a lot of resistance from people when it comes to talking about mental health because of religion. Do you have any recommendations for how to
That's very sad.
to have people not kind of just break down on that and open up that space a little bit more?
Absolutely. So my other caveat in my life is I am a pastor's wife, represent the Baptist sect, hallelujah. And that comes with a lot of times having a cultural humility moment a lot, because a lot of people that I serve, they don't have a higher power, they don't believe in a higher power, or it's the very opposite. I believe in higher power, he's gonna fix everything, gonna be fine, everybody, I don't need nobody, because all I got is Jesus. Whatever they share their higher power is. And so for me, it's the idea of, how about this? How about you take the stuff that you think you can control, bring that to therapy. But all the other things that you want your higher power to control, pray about it, give that to him, her, them. The idea is, if you can allow them to align with their higher power, to know that there shouldn't be struggle, and the big stuff that you want to take on and carry, that's not even your job. And so it's the idea of, okay, because these things are happening in my life right now, how can I make it more manageable? But the big stuff that I can't control, how can I pray about it, or meditate about it, or journal about it, and make sure that both sides of me are balanced? Because we have to always think about, we are three parts. We are mind, we are body or soul, and we're spirit. And so if one of those things are out of whack, you best believe the whole person is off track. And so we have to make sure that we're engaged in all three parts. And if you are a service provider and you get a little clammy about the spirituality piece, I feel that, but also realize it's not about you. And you never know what their journey in that higher power search can do for them, not you. So I've learned how to put, all of that stuff over here. But I've also know that it's okay for me to share how my higher power works in my life too, which makes it okay. I'll never forget this, you all. I was sitting one day having this conversation with a male client that I had had for a long time. And for a long time, he would say he was pagan, or what's the other word? Not atheist, agnostic, and things of that nature. And then one day, he sent me a message and he said, I know this is going to sound weird, so sit down. He said, can you pray for me? I said, I sure will. What do you want me to say? But you know what? It was me being comfortable in my own skin and what I represent, and giving that human space to figure out who and what he wanted to represent. And for that, I say that's how we get people to talk about therapy in a religious situation.
Yeah, amazing. We got time for, I think, one more or so. We can do two. Let's just get them both. Yeah, let's get everybody in there.
Hi, y'all. This is really good for me. I'm a doula, so a lot of what I do is, thank you. But a lot of what I do is, people think it's just physical. There is a whole emotional thing that I'm dealing with for myself, and then I'm dealing with my client, helping them process. And on top of that, we have healthcare providers who have a feeling about doulas, and then we also have healthcare providers that have a feeling about black women. Yeah. Black women with doulas. Yeah. And all of that. And so my question is, how can I continue to help my clients understand how important mental health is when they're dealing with concerns of trauma that might happen, and the trauma that has already happened, and trying to help them make those educated decisions about, like, okay, what your gut is telling you, and then what we talk about, so that they can understand what the processes are and what can or, like what the policies are in regards to what the healthcare provider can and can't do.
Absolutely.
So it's like, it's heavy, but but I love what I do, but it's just like, how do I continue to like support them in a way where they don't feel like they're carrying it alone?
That's tough. I mean, I'm trying to think like, wow, like what would that look like? As it relates to at least the part, and I'll go really quickly, you like, how do I even get them to think about that? Like how it impacts their mental health is even just asking the question, like, how is that impacting you? Because if you're going through, it's like, I just got to focus on all these other things. I don't have time to think about myself and all of that. So you inviting the question of, what has that been doing to you? What have you been experiencing when this happens? At least opens the door for them to be more introspective of like, I don't know, I get upset, I get angry. Let's process that. Can we spend time giving attention to that, even for a moment, might open the door to that conversation.
Power of choice. This says 0S. And I don't want to get in trouble. But power of choice. There are so many women who do not know that they have power of choice. And let's just be honest, black women were used as props for Mr. Gynecologist man. And no anesthesia, nothing. We don't feel pain. I even have my own experience. I was supposed to, I had a young man naturally, and when they went to go, realign me, they didn't let the anesthesia take place, and so I felt the stitching, right? And I was like, ow. He was like, oh, it's almost over. Oh, okay. And so what I've now realized is that we get the opportunity to tell people about choice. You can say, I want another doctor. You can say, do you have a DEI committee, or a board or an association that I can talk to? Like, you get to figure out the choice that you can give to women, and then they feel empowered and be like, you know what? I don't need you with this session. I got this. And so I think it's really important for us always to remember trauma snatches our voice, but options give it back. Yeah, so.
I think we got one more. Yeah, and then that's it. One more. I know, sorry.
Well, Julian Neely, United Way. As you all know, 2020 brought a lot of companies in our community as well as organizations down this equity journey. And a lot of spaces we don't talk about the mental health element of how an environment can also impact our marginalized employees or even workers. And as you, Tim, as you mentioned, like a lot of our leaders that are C-suite senior leaders are identified as white. So for the group mainly, how does mental health equity incorporate into these equitable practices that these companies are trying to implement?
I'll go with that real quick because this is personally, and it wasn't until my therapist named it as like I was going through institutional trauma. And so when you think about it, that lens, I'll just tell it from that. I would come to work not wanting to walk in the door, couldn't sleep, would have nightmares about things that were happening. These are the microaggressions that we had talked about. Wasn't eating because I was like, I just need to go through the whole day so that way I can leave. So when you think about how it impacts, it was that. I mean, I'm a very bubbly. You see me smile. I like to do this. I would come to work and go into my office and shut the door. I wouldn't talk in meetings because I felt I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen. And that pain just trickled in. I mean, my health, like my skin was breaking down. Like I just look back at old pictures and I can just see the harm. And it wasn't until this year that I actually started getting my voice back. So I literally stopped talking physically. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't exercise my voice. People would say, Kayla, like you have so much to share. I didn't feel like anybody cared about what I had to say. And when you think about those things, loss of interest, low self-esteem, worthlessness, isolation, those are symptoms of depression. So when you think about, well, how does that impact? There's so many of us that experience that. And then that also can show up in other emotions. That can show up in rage. That can show up in irritability. And then we're seen as the angry Black people. And that was something that I experienced. So when we think about why does it tie in, why is it important? Because that is exactly how it shows in. Unfortunately, I ended up having to leave, right? So when you think about retention, if we want to care about it that way, it shows up in those aspects as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for your expertise, for being here, and thank you all for your questions.
Boy, I'm over here sweating like a